The information expressed in the following podcast is intended for educational purposes only and was created by and belongs solely to Believe Limited and the Flow podcast and does not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Please speak to your healthcare provider before making any medical decisions.
Look at that, anatomically correct.
Yes.
Beautiful endometrial system.
Isn't she beautiful?
Gorge.
We love her.
She's beautiful, and like she's not perfect in the way that, you know, we see in textbooks, which is like this happy little symmetrical.
Right.
Like a toy knot.
Well, yeah. I was telling Sarah, I'm in Tennessee, so like there's probably some sort of market for, you know.
We've got a blanket we're thinking about, and now we've got a Nerf gun.
Right.
Nerf gun uterus. I love it. It could also be, we've talked about a mug too, like a uterus mug, but like in the shape of drinking.
That sounds, why do I want to put soup in it? Why isn't it coffee? Why is it for soup? In my mind?
It is.
That's for soup.
All cozy things.
I'm really, really grateful to be flowing with your brain today. That's where you're at.
It's a wild ride.
Welcome to the club. Yes. You're fitting well here, Miller.
Awesome. I'm so glad.
Hi, I'm Jessica, and welcome to Flow. I'm here like every month with Sarah Watson, sex therapist. And this month we have Miller Morris, the founder of Comma. She cares about your privacy, and we're going to talk about why. But first, we all want to know a very private question, really. How is your flow?
Thanks for asking. So a few people do. My flow is actually great. I had my IUD replaced about 6 weeks ago. Shout out Kylena. And so I'm still kind of readjusting back into my normal cycle, which is completely typical for anybody who's listening and is considering an IUD. I just want you to know that that's totally to be expected. So starting to fall back into a regular flow. We'll be there probably in about 12 days, if I had to guess, give or take. I should ask Sarah. I should ask Comma's app, not my sister. My sister is also Sarah. Yeah, and my other sister is Jess.
Oh my God.
I know.
We love this.
Fabulous. Miller, you have your sisters, Jessica and Sarah, and you have your Flowsters, Jessica and Sarah, here today.
I love that.
Yeah. Well, wait, so Sarah is the name of the app too, though?
Yes, Sarah's the name of our app. So the Secure Application for Reproductive Autonomy. Also named after my beloved sister who taught me to use a tampon and could also probably tell me when I'm going to start my period just based off of, you know, how I interact with her.
That sister love. It's, you know.
That sisterly love that cuts really deep and sometimes tells you things that you didn't know about yourself, which is, you know, what we've tried to recreate in our technology and in some sense.
Yes.
Like when you're PMSing, like your sister can tell you when PMSing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And how PMS might look and feel for you differently than it's been portrayed in the media or differently than a friend or a family member, another reference point you might have. Because I think we're all kind of sick of hearing how unpleasant we can be without any sort of true empirical evidence about what that unpleasantness might stem from, or also how we could use certain elements of our cycle, certain phases of our cycle to feel better than we ever understood that we could.
Word. And also just different cues in. You only hear about being cranky or wanting chocolate, but I notice as I am PMSing right now, a more irony metal smell.
Yes, that is
from
like a
myself.
Thing for you.
The smell.
Yes.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yes.
It's very interesting. But I don't feel like that's discussed a lot. I'm sure there's some you know, documentation that's helpful if we are noticing our own cycle
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think so much of what Comma and other players in the space are trying to do is create an evidence base around what has historically been kind of dismissed as anecdotal or experiential evidence, right? Like what we know to be our own lived experience probably has some sort of underpinning that we can track, validate, compare against others. That's the scientific method, even if it hasn't been explored in this way, because women and menstruating people have largely been left out and excluded from scientific research. I mean, women weren't mandated into FDA trials until the year I was born, until 1993. And for pregnant people, that's even later, unfortunately.
Right. Like not,
Yeah.
yeah, very, very recent. Well, I'm luteal, which is just
Ooh.
joy, you know?
How you hanging in?
Hanging in. I do, like, well, and we've discussed this on the pod before, but I get a vertigo every once in a while this past year.
Oh,
And I was like, God,
yeah.
I was like, why am I yeah, like it just brought me right back. Not yesterday, day before. And I was like, oh my God. But if, now I know. So,
Yeah.
but that's where
Interesting.
I
Wait, did your vertigo come at ovulation before or also at luteal phase?
am. But now luteal.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Intrigue.
It's really
I think
strange.
spinal fluid and hormones, I think, is under researched. Obviously, not any
Yes.
researched in the female body.
Yes.
Dang.
Yeah. But then
That's unbelievable.
yeah. And then I was like thinking about perimenopause too, because I am there. And
Right.
like, is it perimenopause? Is it my phase? What's happening? It's both. So, but that's what's happening this time right now. It's just fun. Just
Yeah.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're gonna keep flowing with some fun and talking about why tracking with Comma is such a helpful tool for this year and beyond. But first, we're gonna hear a quick word from our sponsor.
This ad is brought to you by Von Vendi, Von Willebrand Factor Recombinant.
Hi, my name is Nicole. I didn't always feel empowered to speak up for myself or ask for the care and support I needed. Becoming part of a community and hearing other people's experiences helped to change my perspective. That's why my deciding factor is making my voice heard. To hear my story and access other helpful resources, drop by Von Vendi, that's VONVENDI.com/patient-stories.
I don't know what the music sounds like.
Let's talk about the fact that we did quickly reveal age-wise. You are like a good decade younger than me.
And me.
Oh, yeah?
And like, yeah. So what in your like vibrance and youthful autonomy have you accomplished already? You must be, working 9 to 5 and 5 to 9. How did you get here to have founded and run this company?
Well, that's a very gracious segue into that question because I'm currently sitting on a heating pad, so I don't feel lively and vivacious.
Usually I am too during the podcast, so I love
Yeah.
that. I love an
Yeah.
emotional support heating
Yeah,
pad.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's in the shape of a fox.
Yes. Cute.
Yeah, it is cute. Let's see, where do I start? I was raised in a healthcare family. My father's a physician. My mom was a nurse before she went to law school. Both of my sisters are in the medical or behavioral health fields. And so I always had an interest in the biomedical sciences, but I'm also a pretty humanities driven person. So I always loved to write, always loved to read. And through undergrad, really started to kind of find my footing in studying public health and finding ways where I could combine some of those passions and some of those loves. Studied abroad in college, which was one of the biggest great fortunes of my life. I was in Scandinavia where I saw certain types of healthcare systems and how they functioned. And then I also lived in South Africa for the better part of a year and got to see their systems of public health. And one of the things that I just couldn't shake was that regardless of where you're looking in the world, healthcare outcomes are in some way, shape, or form, regardless of whether or not we actually want to study this, deeply, deeply impacted by markers of gender equity in a given country. So in Scandinavia, for example, we see some of the most functional, and I don't say that in air quotes to minimize it, just to kind of acknowledge that this metric of success in healthcare systems is, depends on who writes them. Are societies that we largely consider to be some of the most gender just. Women see largely equal pay. Rates of gender-based violence are lower than in other parts of the world, et cetera, et cetera. And in South Africa, we saw a really different pattern play out, which is that there were simultaneously pretty low markers of gender equity, and we were also seeing pretty poor health outcomes, particularly in the HIV space, which is where I got really interested and started doing my research. So then I went on and did my master's in the social determinants of health, and then went on to do an MPH in global health and epidemiology, where I studied HIV and gender-based violence and how these two things were interconnected. And that's actually where I ended up getting the idea for Kama. I was doing work with a great maternal health organization based in rural Western Kenya, looking at the predictive factors of HIV and gender-based violence. And we knew that one of the most protective factors against both of those public health crises was a girl's ability to stay in school. And when we started looking at why girls were dropping out of school, one of the biggest things that came up was lack of access to menstrual products and the inability to kind of manage one's menstrual health, menstrual hygiene. And that was really curious to me, especially because we were getting feedback around that data point from policymakers and community leaders that, well, there are free products available in the clinic or free products available in schools. And so why is it that there are these accessible or affordable products, but we're not seeing that kind of trickle down into an uptake or use of those products and increased girls' retention in school? And so we got to work. I mean, I'm a mixed methods researcher. We started doing some qualitative data collection through focus grouping. And one of the things that came up in an independent study was, well, if you don't have a trash man that comes and takes your garbage every Tuesday, a single-use product like a pad, which was what was largely made available to these women and girls, doesn't make a ton of sense. But if you're living in that kind of community, you might also lack reliable access to clean water. So keeping a reusable product like a period panty or a menstrual cup clean was really challenging, and families could perceive the danger in that, even though there were a lot of well-meaning NGOs that had donated a ton of reusable period care products. And so we started thinking about a different kind of period care solution that could really be designed for the rural poor, and a community distribution model that could potentially be powerful than just kind of products, but what could we do if we were using menstrual blood as a screening sample in communities that didn't have access to women's healthcare providers? Could this be a low cost, low intervention solution for gynecologic screening? And I couldn't get that idea out of my head. But then I graduated from school. I was at the WHO for a little bit and saw how big, super well-funded global health institutions work. COVID happened. I graduated in 2019, so was swept up in pandemic response pretty quickly after graduation. But just couldn't stop thinking about this problem and a potential solution. And because it was a market-driven solution, taking a product that already exists and innovating on it. And because I'd worked at these large global health entities and I'd worked at small community-led entities and I'd worked in academia, I knew, unfortunately, that what we were conceptualizing maybe wasn't a good funding fit for some of those fields. And so I was lucky enough to take some classes at the business school at Vanderbilt and was introduced to the concept of social enterprise, and started thinking about a for-profit period care company in the United States for higher earners, and with a sister nonprofit that had a revenue sharing agreement so that we could reinvest profits into some of this impact work in low and middle income communities in the United States and globally. So yeah, that's how we got here. And ever since that idea, it's just kind of evolved. And the more that I learn about menstruation, the more disappointed, although I'm not shocked, I am that we haven't been completely reimagining this space from the ground up for a long time, because there's just so much potential for women and menstruating people's lives to be a lot better, a lot more comfortable, and to be a lot more informed and empowered if we stopped thinking about periods as an aisle at Target or Walmart and started thinking about it as part of healthcare.
I mean,
clap.
rounds of applause.
Yeah.
Here they go. Wow. And the Nobel Prize goes to, because that is all correct.
Whoosh.
And wow. When you mentioned Scandinavia and South Africa, I'm curious if you could do a comparison of what you think it's like here in America.
Ooh. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I was 19, I felt like maybe we sat somewhere in the middle. And now that I'm 31, I don't think that at all. You know, I am an optimist, and I do think that there are really, really smart, capable people, and we have innovation pipelines that could enable us to really restructure how reproductive health is done in the United States. But in the current day and age, I think it's going to look a lot different than what we have historically relied on to drive forward biomedical sciences and healthcare. And I think if you are an American listening to this podcast, I want to encourage you to be a part of the change and be a part of the solution, because it's not going to get any better if we're waiting around for somebody to come fix it. I mean, comma is not ever something. I never thought I would be an entrepreneur. Like, I didn't see myself starting a company and building an enterprise and thinking about public-private partnership. I thought I would work in academia or nonprofit my entire life. But I kind of had a realization in my mid-20s that if someone's going to save us, it's going to be ourselves.
Yep.
And so, unfortunately, this bootstraps individualism that we see in the United States, while it's a myth, we also have to lean on it in this current sociopolitical climate, and we're going to have to get up and we're going to have to do the work. So, I don't think we're somewhere in between Scandinavia and South Africa. I think we are our own thing with our own unique set of problems and challenges that fit into a larger global collective. But I do think the American entrepreneurial spirit is strong. And if we can use that as a means of catalyzing innovation for health equity, we could figure out new pathways and new doors to push this space forward, even if we don't have the traditional heroes come in to save the day.
Okay, yeah, the cavalry is not coming, but comma
Cavalry's not
is.
coming.
Comma is okay. We keep us safe.
Yes.
Yeah, we keep us safe. Absolutely.
Well, can we back up? Can we back up
Yeah.
and talk about what your earliest menstruation education was like? How did you learn about menstruation? I am assuming that sisters are older, but
Sisters are older.
okay. So tell us how you learned about menstruation.
Totally. Oh man, I'm trying to think of how big of a fool I'm willing to be.
We like all
Yeah,
types, so
maybe we just throw the whole kitchen sink at it. So sisters are older, but they're older enough that they were in college by the time I was in elementary school.
okay.
And so I didn't have a ton of that kind of like bathroom chats, sharing sweaters, swapping tips. But I did in middle school go to all girls school, and was able to really benefit from a women created sex education curriculum, which especially in the state of Tennessee, I think was really important and really valuable for a young girl. And I'll say, even though that school did a very, very good job, in 2008, we were still putting tampons in the sleeves of our sweatshirts and walking to the bathroom hoping that nobody knew what we were doing. And, you open the wrapper so gingerly and so quietly. And so even in these spaces that were designed for menstruating people, for, good, reliable, evidence-based, empowering education to be given to girls, there was stigma and there was shame and there was discomfort. So one of the things that we think about at Comma a lot is what parts of the consumer industry could really work for period care. I mean, there's parts of it that don't, right? Like this is healthcare, but what parts of it could be really powerful? And I was in college or high school when Glossier launched, and I remember this just kind of cult phenomenon of like putting stickers on water bottles. Being in college in 2013, like that was how you kind of signaled to other people what you did. And so one of the questions we've asked ourselves a lot is, what would it look like to create a period care solution that middle school girls aren't just not ashamed of, but like they want to put our stickers on their water bottle, where like they want period care to be visible.
Yes.
In the way that we think about, clothes, makeup, skincare, other kinds of consumer industries where women have really led the way.
Rock and roll. It's so interesting they didn't want to make the noise of the tampons because Sarah here, she wanted to make all the noise.
Yes.
That was part of her.
Oh yeah. Before I started my period, my story is I would go and I went to very private, a private Christian school here in Michigan. And it's, there was no sex education, but man, did I want my period. So I would just lift the tampon box in the bathroom, just like to make the noise of the like to put the trash away, but like not knowing like, oh, you have to unwrap things. So I like to make the noise, but then also hid the tampons down my sleeve when I was walking to the bathroom.
Never let them know your next move.
No, it's crazy. Right. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about why it is private. And I was also taught some of the notion that our periods are private and they're ours to know and experience, and that is true, just like our bodies are. That's our autonomy. And yet the idea of sharing is also how we in community with our flowsters can learn so much and up-level each other. And yet sharing with anyone else that we don't actually want to be sharing with is really not a good idea, especially now. And I guess I'm trying to segue into that. Why is this privacy so important?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, private but not secret is exactly the rallying cry around menstruation and reproductive health, simultaneously sharing what wants to be shared and keeping yours what rightfully belongs to you, are tenets of autonomy, which means the linchpin here is consent. And I don't mean consent as in you check the box of terms and conditions that were intentionally written in convoluted legalese that nobody understands and nobody flips through. Because periods have largely been seen as a consumer experience with consumer solutions, that's in pads, tampons, packaged products world, but also in technology. So there's a larger conversation now, but for a long time, it flew under a lot of people's radars that most cycle tracking apps, at least in the United States, sell your data. Your data is the commodity, especially if you are opting into a free version of a technology. And, I mentioned my mom is an attorney, but was a clinician before she went to law school. And I remember back in early 2022, speaking with her about the vision that I had for Kama and the vision about periods being more powerful than just something that we were afraid to talk about and maybe being a meaningful part of our healthcare system. And she said, well, I think you really need to be looking at HIPAA. And to my surprise, none of these cycle tracking apps were adhering to HIPAA standards and treating period data as protected healthcare information. Not only were they not doing that, but they were selling these data.
Shocking.
And us, what?
Shocking.
Indirect violation of HIPAA is what you're saying.
Absolutely,
Okay.
Absolutely. Because it's almost as though there are different rules around data privacy and security when we're talking about women's bodies and women's data, as opposed to, the default, which is always going to be a man's data, a man's body. And so she and I were kind of ideating on what it would look like to create a cycle tracking app that was benchmarked by HIPAA and held itself to the privacy standards and security standards that we hold doctors and hospitals and healthcare systems to, which is that you don't sell data, you don't collect it unless it's going to be useful to the patient, and you don't collect it unless you're going to actually do something about it, right? I mean, it would be unethical to screen for diseases that we might not be able to help you cure or help manage your symptoms, for example. And that's not the case with a lot of this bio-tracking space because they're not playing by the rules of healthcare, they're playing by the rules of the consumer industry. And so we started thinking a lot about this as a security and privacy value proposition for women and menstruating people. And then the Dobbs decision was leaked. And almost overnight, we started rethinking our go-to-market strategy, which is rather than have a tampon company that has a secure and private cycle tracker that could help do things like predict how many tampons you need and when, for example, we were looking at a secure cycle tracker as a wraparound digital infrastructure for all other touch points of your period care, whether that be automating your subscription service to our biodegradable tampon line or looking at laboratory diagnostic work, but those data needing a place to live. And if you're looking at HIPAA as your standards and as your kind of privacy and security protocol and best practice, yes, this is a huge advantage from a privacy and security perspective, but HIPAA also makes data more powerful because with your consent, these data can be interoperable with your electronic medical record, which means it can be linked to the medical record that you and your doctor share. And so, you know, your 15-minute annual visit doesn't have to be rapport building and tell me about your last period and what does your period feel like, but you and your provider can come to the visit armed with that information together to collaborate on a care plan and make the most out of your time together, which I think is really cool.
Oh,
awesome.
Man. I mean, you just like, you're clarifying so much as you're specifying, like just considering the consumer market versus the healthcare attitude towards period care and the notion that because the products have been the essential education of periods in America, like you need a product, so go buy products, that it's a consumer-based conversation versus I go talk to my doctor.
Right. I mean, I think that so much of my academic background is to drive health behavior change, you have to meet people where they are. And where people are tracking their cycles on technologies that they may or may not understand with risks that they may or may not be comfortable with. And using period products that they may or may not like and that may or may not align with their values or that may or may not feel safe or sustainable or what have you, but it's all that they've got. And so if you were to find a period care partner that cared about all of those things and was willing to make baby steps in innovating better versions of those things, could we combine those things together to create an approach to period care that's bigger than the sum of its parts? What if your cycle tracker spoke to your tampons and your tampons spoke to your lab work and your lab work spoke to your cycle tracker and your cycle tracker spoke to your doctor? All of a sudden, are we looking at a world where we have a better understanding through the discarded endometrial tissue and menstrual blood of your risk for endometrial disease or an STI than we did from a pap smear? And are we able to flag markers for PCOS or endometriosis in a matter of months relative to the 7 to 10 years that women on average are currently suffering in the healthcare system to get a diagnosis? Are we able to pair some of these data today together in like ethical ways that can drive healthcare forward, knowing that historically these industries have remained silos because they were built by men or they were built by people who don't have periods and don't really know how these things work, but also because they were built by industry first and thought about, you know, kind of the user of these products second, not without thinking about what would be the best product or what would be the best solution and can we build that? And I think that that's what's really neat about our team is that we see the existing products and services in the space as really, really great jumping off points for our work so that people can familiarize themselves with Kama and so that we can earn trust. But that doesn't mean that we're going to stay in the box of a tampon has to look like this or feel like this for forever. Yeah.
Gosh, innovation in tampons?
What? That sounds crazy.
I mean, like you said, men or people who don't menstruate or don't understand periods, or people who do menstruate and don't understand periods, have been in leadership positions for far too long of period care. And so all this innovation, it's not only refreshing, it's like, it's like, thank goodness you're so smart to have figured it all out. How did tech become part of things for you? Just as a problem solve to continue this mission? Or was there other ways in?
Yeah, as a problem solve to continue this mission and as an understanding that people deserve to demystify their bodies and deserve to demystify this process. And in 2025, the way that we receive, process, make sense of information is largely happening digitally. And could we create a technology and a platform where you could have a single source of truth for your menstrual health and by extension, your reproductive health? Could we create a technology that was intuitive for you to track your period and help teach you along the way? This is why we're asking these questions. We don't just want these data points for the sake of wanting them. This is why we ask you these questions, but also ask you, are there questions we're not asking that we should be? Because not only are these industries led by people who largely don't understand or care about menstruation, but I'm going to say the hard thing, which is that science and medicine has largely been led by people who don't experience or don't care about menstruation. And so the current biomedical screening tools that we rely on, these questionnaires that help identify early risk, might be incomplete or might be inaccurate or might be, dare I say it, yielding different results in 2025 when people are using different forms of contraception and are eating different kinds of diets and have different kinds of stress levels than they were in 1970 when they were first empirically validated. Like, we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we now have the ability through an technology to do that innovation faster, because we are constantly asking for feedback, and innovation is like in our blood, just in the same way that autonomy, data privacy, security is.
I love that. I think what immediately comes to mind too is we have so many listeners that have extreme menstruation, right?
Yep.
So I'm very curious about like the data and how it can share, because like before we were recording, like hopping on and thinking about how many undiagnosed menstruators are out there that maybe potentially have a bleeding disorder, but they think because they go through, 4 super tampons in, 4 minutes.
Right.
And so does their mom and so does their aunt, then it's normalized, right? But then something like Kama can help figure, wait a second. This is not typical. This is not average. You need to, I don't know how it's going to play out in your app, but like, then you need to go see a professional who can help you figure out this extreme bleeding.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we see Sarah's role. So in her earliest days, when we launch in the coming weeks, Sarah is meant to be a cycle tracking app that identifies patterns and issues of concern in your data and then can link you with providers who can help. So we can't do everything, but we can get you in touch with the specialists that are maybe in your insurance network in your area, or maybe that's not what you need. Maybe what you need is, teletherapy because you're logging like chronic stress and that's impacting your period. Or maybe it's not yet, but it could. There are a variety of solutions out there for a ton of different conditions that can implicate somebody's menstrual health. The question isn't, is there help available? The question is, do people have a good enough understanding of their own bodies to know that they need to ask for help in the first place?
Right.
And that is why Sarah, again, aptly named after my big sister, is really designed to do. And so we're committed to innovating and to having additional types of features and exciting, work in predictive care, for example. But first thing is first, level setting. What is normal? What's normal in 2025?
Right.
Well, and yeah, right. And also with the knowledge that what might be normal or typical might still not be comfortable, and you might still want help. And that's totally okay. And that's totally fine. And we want to create an area where you can articulate that and that there are resources and partners at your disposal that you can be connected to.
Love that.
Yeah.
It's like, I'll tell you why I now have hope as we're in this closing this episode. Because it's truly like, of course it needs an overhaul. Of course it was founded without women's body. I'm talking about the medical industry, healthcare industry.
Yeah.
It founded without women's bodies in mind, menstruators in mind. And so a big part of the non-hope would be that who amongst us can communicate in the language of what is currently there in order to move it to what it needs to be to next.
Right.
Needs to be next. So the idea of having to be folded into the current state of things and learn about it, the academia, the healthcare as it is, to not get either overwhelmed and depressed and terrified by how it's operating, but instead to see the opportunity for how, by understanding how it's operating, you may shift it. This is what I've heard in you talking with us today and flowing with us. And I so appreciate getting a little kernel of hope for how we're going to move things forward. Yeah.
I mean, this is how you build hope, right? I mean, I think we have this idea that hope is just this like ephemeral thing that either is or isn't, but like hope is a discipline, it's a skill, it's a muscle. And there are more reasons to be hopeful in this space than there are to be scared, not because the threats aren't real, but because the people showing up are tougher than the challenges that we're facing. And yeah, so it's like, it's truly an honor and a privilege to be able to speak with like-minded folks about this, because you all have made it a deposit into my Hope bank account today as well.
Hey, we're all leaving with hope. I love
We're all leaving with hope. Yeah.
I can't wait to make some edits with the most inspiring music under a bunch of the things you've said. Thank you
Yeah,
so
and then, like,
much.
Doves can fly.
But bleeding, but menstruating doves as they fly.
Doves.
Yes.
Yeah, I like
So
it.
I think bleeding doves would definitely like get us viral.
Yeah,
in some
we can figure that
capacity.
out.
Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely.
We want the people to know. We want the people to know.
Yeah, I like
We'll
it.
be on Fox News in a jiffy.
Oh gosh.
Get the message out wherever you are to communicate, to find Kama. We'll obviously have it in the show notes, ways to get in touch, ways to find
absolutely.
out. We will be keeping track not only of our personal cycles, but of what's going on with your amazing work.
Sure.
Yes.
Miller, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything else you want to say as we're closing out?
I just want to say to all of your listeners, thank you for listening and thank you for caring. I think you probably have had more experiences than not where people try to dismiss your concern or your interest in this particular area of your health. And you showing up for yourself is like the biggest act of hope and of courage that you could possibly do. So keep seeking out information and feel free to reach out to me or anyone on our team who are amazing. I didn't speak about them at all.
We just need to have you back. There's so much more to talk.
sure.
We'd love to talk about your team. I have so many questions.
We're here to be a resource. We're here to be a partner, and we'd love to earn your trust in 2025. So yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
The funny thing about courage is that it feels like fear when you're doing it. Thank you for showing us how to be brave, and we will flow with you all next month. It's Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month next month. Looking forward to talking to you about that.
Yay.
Awesome.
Flow on.
Flow is produced by Bloodstream Media. Big shout out to our creative director, Amy Board, and our editor, Kay Vermeil. New episodes of Flow will be available the second Thursday of every month.
Hey, that's the day after I start menstruating.
And thanks to our sponsor, Takeda, for their support of Flow.